The Inwood 8 edition, Towns of Inwood preliminary plat, planned unit development, and comprehensive plan amendments.
All right, good evening, Chair and members of the commission. I am going to share with you staff's review of this application. I've got about 44 slides for you, so I'll try and keep it brief, but we've got a lot going on here. So I'll jump right in. All right, so in front of the city, we've got 3 different requests with this application. The first one is a preliminary plat. The second one is a planned unit development. There's a number of different flexibilities we'll talk about that are requested. But one of the important ones to mention is that this development is proposed with private roads. And then another is that we have standard flexibility requested from some of those bulk standards, and we'll talk about all of those things. The third application is a comprehensive plan amendment. That is an amendment to the city's 2040 plan. And I just want to make sure everyone knows, if you're looking at this image, obviously those parcels circled in red or surrounded in red, those are the subject parcels. There are 4 different parcels. One of them has an address. 3 of them are currently unaddressed. The total acreage for this property that is in the Inwood area south of 5th Street North is just under 19.5 acres. All of that land is considered buildable. It's not encumbered by wetlands or other unbuildable areas. This property already has, I believe, some mass grading that's been done to it and as part of previous development in this area. And it currently is sitting vacant. There are no existing land uses on this property. So I'll talk a little bit about some of the land use analysis here, and then we're going to talk about the background of this area, because there has been, obviously, as you can see, some background in terms of development. So from a zoning standpoint, this property is zoned as high-density residential. The city's zoning map does show a PUD overlay. This is common in areas that have already had an approved planned unit development. Inwood, the single-family portions that are already built out do have a PUD overlay that provides them some flexibilities to the city's ordinance. So you see that PUD overlay over this high-density residential, and the developer is not proposing to change the high-density residential zoning that this property currently has to anything else. I do want to note that we have reviewed the PUD ordinance that granted the flexibility to the Inwood development, the single-family part of that area, and those development flexibilities did not extend to this part of the development. A very small part of this overall area is within the city's shoreland overlay district. So there are some things to mention there. We've looked at it, and there are really no material impacts to this review, but the city does have a 25% impervious surface limit in that area, and the DNR has the ability to review and comment on applications. So we also, as you know, you'll remember from our training, we look at the comprehensive plan, the future land use map, to understand what's the long-term guidance for this land that's being developed. And we note that the city's current comprehensive plan, the 2040 comprehensive plan, has the land guided with a mix of different categories. The first one is high-density residential. That's the property, the northern, we'll call it the northeastern parcel. It's the one south of 5th Street North and east of Island Trail. Mixed-use commercial is the future land use for that parcel on the northwest side. That's west of Island Trail and south of 5th Street North. And those southern 2 tiny little parcels on the very southern part of this development, those are actually guided business park. So what the developer is proposing to do is just have one consistent future land use category that covers all of these properties, and that would be high-density residential. High-density residential allows 8 to 15 units per acre, and so the resulting future land use would have a consistent density allowance of between 8 and 15 units per acre. It would also let the developer blend the density across the development. All right, so I did want to just talk a little bit about how we got to where we are now. So as background, As mentioned, the Inwood preliminary plat and PUD is what was initially approved for, this is a master planned development, and one of the largest at the time in Lake Elmo's history. This was approved by the city council in December of 2014. So that's over 10 years ago now. At that time, the city also did an environmental assessment worksheet. That's a formal environmental review, which anticipated the following in this general part of the development: 176 rental townhomes, 150 multifamily units, 120 senior housing units, and 12 townhomes. Later on, after this preliminary plat was approved, Inwood 1st through 5th editions were platted. These were the single-family home parts of the Inwood development. So those were approved, generally speaking, between 2015 and 2017 is when they were built out. And later on, Quick Trip did come in 2020 as the 6th edition. So since that time, no other parts of the Inwood development have been developed, although we are now looking at what we're calling the 8th edition. There was a 7th edition that didn't ever materialize, as you may know, so we've skipped now to 8. So that's a little bit of the background. And here is that image of this was the PUD concept or PUD plan, as it were, that was proposed at the time in 2014 that this project was initially approved. At that time, the developer was Hans Hagen Homes, which I believe has turned into M&I Homes. So you can see a couple things I want to point out. You can see the existing single-family development that has already been built, but it was accompanied to the west by strictly commercial development due west of the single-family part. And then in the southern part of this development, that's south of 5th Street North, that is where this proposed project is located. It had, at that time, townhomes and apartments. So this has been something that has been anticipated by the city in its previous reviews. Here is another image from that 2014 development project where we again saw the townhomes and apartment buildings. In this particular one, this was an open space diagram showing some of the areas that were going to be open space. At that time as well, the city also reviewed a phasing plan, and this kind of backs up what we just talked about in terms of the history of the development here. So on the screen now, this is the application that is currently in front of the city. This is the preliminary plat that's been proposed by M&I Homes in partnership with Rachel Development, who is the apartment builder. So on this preliminary plat, you'll see townhomes, and an apartment building is on the next slide here. This is the proposed phasing plan. So the townhome portion would be built in 3 separate phases. I want to note that we're looking at a proposed 123 unit apartment building with 149 attached townhomes that are proposed here. So I'm just going to go through a couple different plan pages that we can always come back to reference. So this is the landscaping plan that's been proposed, and we'll talk about all the different elements that staff have reviewed. Here is a colored rendering that's very similar to the landscaping plan. It kind of shows how the development would be would appear. Here's that a little closer up. And now I'm going to jump into staff's review against the city's code. So when we're looking at planned unit developments, we do first start with those minimum criteria. The city has 3 minimum criteria to approve a planned unit development. The first one is that the property is over 5 acres, which this project meets. The second one is that the project provides open space equal to or greater than 20% of the total land area. In this case, staff have reviewed the project and determined that there is a minimum of 20% open space, but we'll talk about staff's comments on the open space later. And then lastly, the project has to meet existing grid or street layout pattern in the city. And in this case, they're using existing access points that have been planned. And we'll come back and talk about these objectives as well, but the city also has objectives that are identified. If a PUD is ever to be approved, it should be meeting these objectives. And so there are a number of them. I've put a couple in bold. You can kind of see them here. We can come back to this again, but the city should find the development meets these objectives, or at least one or two of them, to approve a PUD. These are things like innovation in land development, promotion of integrated land uses, establishment of appropriate transitions. You get the idea. These are kind of ideals of good development. I'm going to keep moving, and if you do have questions, you are welcome to just jump in and let me know. I want to talk about the preliminary plat review and all those different elements of the code we've reviewed against. Just on the slide here, you can see what they are. We're looking at things like land use, which we've talked about, bulk standards. These are things like setbacks, tree preservation, grading, public infrastructure, and park dedication. So these are the bulk standards. I don't expect everyone to be able to read everything on this table, but this is provided in the staff report, and it summarizes generally how the development would meet the city's performance standards. These are things like lot area, setbacks, and building height as an example. So, and I've also colored in and shaded those cells where a deviation from the city code is being requested. So the planned unit development flexibility would be requested for these parts. On the proposed single-family attached townhomes, the units meet the city's minimum for lot area for the townhomes. And in particular, it's because the overall part of the attached townhome portion of the development is a large enough size to meet a minimum standard per unit. Where we see the need for flexibility from the city's code is the impervious surface standards. And when you look at the lots, you'll understand why. The city's front yard setback, again, when you look at those lots, you'll see why. Typically, we see these needs for flexibility with townhomes because often they're platted on small lots that would be owned by individual owner occupants of the townhomes. And they're not all like a full standard single-family lot. There is also a request for a rear yard setback deviation and setback from 5th Street North in a couple of different areas. On the apartment building, we're only seeing one need for flexibility, and that is to the lot area. The simple thing here is that the apartment lot is basically not large enough to meet the city's requirements per unit. Okay, so I've advanced the slide, and you can see here, these are the two different types of single-family attached townhomes that are being proposed. We have one called the carriage multifamily townhome lot. That's townhomes that are, we'll call it front-loaded. They're facing the street with both the front door and the garage facing the street. On the right side of the slide, you'll see the city collection lot. This is a townhome that is intended to be loaded both to the front and to the rear. The front being that you have that front entrance to a sidewalk or a street, and the rear being that you have your garage facing an alley, basically. That's the idea. So before I get into the design standards for the units, I want to talk about the city code does have some specific performance standards for each of these two different uses. So the first one is those attached townhomes. The city code requires that buildings are smaller than having 10 units attached together, which that is the case here, that the project meets that. The city code restricts basically all building types in the high-density residential district from having parking in front of the building. So the idea is that you have parking rear-loaded. No parking, again, allowed in front yards, and then having a public street frontage, or if you don't have that, having a conditional use permit granted for that. And lastly, that the open spaces have to be at least 300 square feet per unit, which is the case in the attached townhome. On the multifamily dwelling side, that part of the development actually does meet both specific performance standards. One, to not have parking in the front yard area, and two, to have common open spaces of at least 200 square feet. All right, so I'm going to move into a review of the city's design standards manual. This is a separate manual from the city code, but it's adopted by reference. So the development does have to meet these standards for design. They're broken down into site and building design. So in the site design, We look at things like building placement, streetscape, and landscaping and parking. On the building design, we're looking at really the facades of the building, the materials, et cetera. So, and I'll reference a couple different parts of the site plan so that we can talk about them. And the first area that I'm gonna look at is the attached townhomes. So you can see on the site plan here, it's the area in red, those are the attached townhomes. When we look at design standards for the townhome site, the first note on building placement in the staff report, buildings and entrances are oriented towards the street where possible, so they're perpendicular to the street. That's what the design manual wants to see. Interior to the development, building entrances are not always provided directly onto a public street, so some are provided onto a sidewalk, for example. On the streetscape side of things, concrete sidewalks do run throughout the development and are available to each unit. However, they aren't necessarily along a public street because we have private streets proposed. Buildings along Street C, which I'll go back, it's the east to west street that's on the south part of this attached townhome area. So units along there are primarily loaded with their driveways facing the street. And those units on the south side of the development are all the way front-loaded and have both the front door and the garage facing the street. All right, and moving on to landscaping, the design standards manual wants to see preservation of existing trees, which this site plan does. Overstory trees, I will note, don't meet the city's boulevard tree spacing standard of 50 feet along streets, and I'm talking about those internal streets to the development. Lastly, the landscaping areas between the units and the driveways, there's really not any landscaping in those areas, so I think there's an opportunity perhaps to add some. Parking, this part of the project does meet the city's parking standards with enclosed stalls to serve the units, but the visitor parking would be on driveways. Here's the renderings of the attached townhomes. And so I'll talk a little bit about those design standards for townhome buildings. First, the form of the building and the facade. The buildings are proposed to have consistent architecture with facades that don't have a lot of blank spaces, which is good. Again, parking is not recessed or rear-loaded, so that is a concern. Building materials, the colors are generally consistent with the city's standards, although I will note that vinyl siding was noted as proposed, and that is not allowed by the city's manual. In terms of mass and scale of the buildings, they're articulated similar to those single-family homes that are in the area, in that they're broken up a little bit. They're not continuous, 8-unit buildings. And then 5th Street North, I would note, also does create a nice buffer with a minimum of 180 feet between structures. So there's a couple of other comments that I don't think I'll go into, but we can if you have any questions. So I'll talk about the apartment building now. On the apartment site, the building placement is what the city's manual will want to see. The building is oriented towards the street where possible without having drives or parking in between the street and the building. There was a note in the staff report that suggested better connectivity is needed to 5th Street North in particular, because we want pedestrians to be able to move from the building into those future areas that are for commercial development, be able to walk or bike there if they choose. At first, the site plan did not have that, but a site plan has been resubmitted that did show a sidewalk connection between the building on the north side and 5th Street North. There is a comment also on just landscaping of that area. There are a lot of trees there, and I think landscaping will, paired with that sidewalk, be able to provide a good amenity space. Otherwise, the site design does appear to meet the manual. Here's the rendering of that apartment building. So you can see, generally, it looks like a modern apartment building. The form and facade of the building are generally meeting the manual. They're articulated with not a ton of blank space. Parking is fully screened internal to the site. The building materials are generally consistent with the city's, those allowed in the manual. The mass of this building It is broken up by the way that it's kind of U-shaped and not one really long linear building. Fifth Street North, again, here does create a buffer between existing structures. The closest structure to this building is 235 feet away. And lastly, we have reviewed for other things like roofs, entries, and lighting, and all of those elements will have to be consistent with the city's standards if it is approved. So that's the design review on both of those parts of the development. If you have questions, I'd be happy to get more into the weeds there. I want to briefly talk about parkland dedication. In this area of the city, there are two nearby public parks, Ivywood and Stonegate. So understanding that, the city's park commission in March recommended that the city move forward with cash in lieu of land dedication if this project is to move forward. I would note to you that there are no trail connections in this area that are really critical. There is a trail that runs along Fifth Street North on the north side of that corridor. So I think what we're looking at here is more of sidewalk connections and pedestrian connectivity. Tree preservation is a pretty straightforward review with this one. There is a stand of pine trees on the east side of the property. There would be one red pine removed. Otherwise, the rest of them could be saved with no mitigation required by code. Here's the landscaping plan, again for reference. You can see that landscaping is provided throughout the development, but concentrated really on kind of either end for the most part, with a lot of the tree plantings that are required placed on the west side of the development. So for landscaping and screening review, overall, the number of the plantings that are required by the city's code are met by the plan. That being said, some of those are in areas that could have spatial constraints, like if the tree isn't planted like exactly where it's proposed, it could be, you know, in a utility corridor or something of that nature. So location would be very critical with the way the planting plan is proposed. And I would mention again that the city does have a standard of 50 feet spacing for trees along streets, whether they're public or private. So I did want to mention that again. In terms of buffering, I was anticipating a question, why isn't this development providing buffering from the Bremer financial use in particular? And the way that the city's screening buffering requirements work is that the more intensive land use would have had to supply the buffer, which actually in this case would have been the Bremer, but that came first and they didn't provide any because it was built before this standard was created. And as I mentioned, there could be an opportunity to incorporate maybe some more foundation plantings throughout the development to really help break up a little bit of the areas where the townhomes are all loaded towards the street. One of the last design elements that we look at is parking and circulation. So overall, this development does meet the city's parking requirements. For townhomes, we have 2 stalls within each garage, plus those that are in the driveways, and visitor parking throughout that part of the development. On the apartment side, there is a combination of underground and surface parking that would meet the city's standards. And then in terms of access and circulation, there are existing access points along Fifth Street North. Those are fixed. There are no new access points being proposed, so that's good. In terms of turn lanes, though, there could be some that are required along Island Trail to anticipate some of the traffic in this area. Pedestrian connections, as I mentioned, around and through the site will be required. Currently, the attached townhomes are seen with some sidewalks throughout that part of the development. And then lastly, there is an east to west sidewalk connection that is presently proposed along the south side of the development. I'll bring up that planting plan. It's actually south of the southernmost attached townhomes. Can't really see it very well here, but maybe a break in that long connection would be good in terms of letting people pass through the site. So the planning department wasn't the only department that reviewed the project. We have sent out this application to internal and external reviewers. Internal to the city, the fire department provided a memo that's provided in the staff report, more or less general comments about making sure that the buildings are sprinkled, et cetera. City engineer memo, again, similar to that, was provided in the packet. And the landscape architect provided a memo as well. In terms of external agencies, we did send this project to South Washington Watershed District, who their staff indicated there were no comments on the project, either the proposed plans or the comprehensive plan amendment. The DNR did not respond with any comments. Washington County, City of Oakdale, and Woodbury staff all also provided no comments. They noted that they had no comments. Okay, so getting towards the end of this presentation here, I want to talk to you about the PUD flexibilities again that are requested. This slide intends to summarize all of the different flexibilities that are requested. So we're looking at minimum lot size for the multifamily apartment building, front and rear yard setbacks for the townhome lots, impervious surface for the attached townhome lots. Again, when you have a small lot that's just drawn around the unit, you end up with easily over 75% impervious. Number 4 is the building setback from 5th Street North. And that setback is needed, or that flexibility is needed where 5th Street North becomes turn lanes. And so when you have those turn lanes, bringing the curb further to the south, those proposed attached townhomes along that corridor are now within that mandatory 40-foot setback. The attached townhomes on the south side of this development are not fronting a public street. Boulevard tree spacing, again, that's a minimum of every 50 feet. Parking between the facade of the townhome and the street isn't permitted by the city's code. And lastly, the design standards manual, again, vinyl siding for those attached townhomes and access to the apartment building. That one has been addressed by the addition of that sidewalk. So some of those design concerns that you've heard from me, staff find that the plans don't necessarily exceed the standards for landscaping. They're planting the number of required trees. The sidewalks and trees that are located in this development, some of them are pretty close to buildings or easements. So again, when I noted that tree plantings could need to be pretty precise, that would be that comment. Streetscape will not necessarily have the amount of trees that we need to see via code. One thing that staff note is the development is proposed with 90-degree angled parking in the attached townhome part of the development. Staff would suggest switching that to parallel parking, be a little bit more similar to what you'd find in the rest of the city, and it would maximize the green space in the areas that are currently with that 90-degree bump out. The open space on the townhome side doesn't necessarily exceed the minimum standards. Most of the open space is made up of those areas between buildings or perhaps between the buildings and the street. The proposed rear-loaded design has created a combination of a street and an alley. So the roads that you see, if I can go back to the map, are sort of acting as both like a street and an alley. It's like a narrow street. What the city design manual I think wants to see more of is a combination perhaps of public streets with private alleys, which are a little bit more like driveways. In terms of access to the apartment building, did mention that it was lacking to the north. Strong pedestrian connectivity is definitely going to be something that staff look for in this project, because you have development that's put in a fair amount of people right next to a possible commercial area that probably develops if there's more households. Lastly, I do want to mention the screening of the parking lot to the south could be considered, just because there could be conflicts with that parking area. We've got people pulling in and then headlights pointed at the buildings. Okay. A couple more slides and then I'm done. So findings, in terms of the city to make findings on the preliminary plat and PUD, I didn't propose any findings necessarily to you in the report. They should be made based on a number of different considerations. So in terms of preliminary plats, they can only be denied if they meet criteria for denial. Those criteria I do have available if you'd like to reference those. And then the PUDs should meet the identified objectives, which we have talked about. Considerations are up on the screen, and we can talk about these as you get into your discussion a little bit further. Is the project consistent with the city's comp plan, the city's ordinances, does it meet the minimum standards? Effectively, with the PUD, does the flexibility benefit to the developer? Is there a public benefit to discuss there? And how might the project impact surrounding areas? In terms of the comprehensive plan amendment, staff are supportive of that. It would help to kind of clear up what you saw on the earlier slide was 3 different classifications or categories for this development or future development, which was anticipated through Inwood. It would be beneficial to have one uniform future land use in this area. And it's also worth noting that the city's comprehensive plan creates a maximum of 15 units per acre already. We just have different categories. Let's see here. So the options for the city, the Planning Commission this evening will make a recommendation to the City Council. You can recommend approval with conditions, denial, or you could move to table the request for more information. Statutory deadlines, I do want to let you know, we've talked about those before. The city has 120 days to review a project from the date of a complete application, which was February 14th. So in this case, the end of our runway is June 14th. So the last possible Planning Commission meeting that this could come back to would be May 27th. Although I do want to note too, I think May 12th would be a far better date for we are to bring something back. If the city does move to approve the development, staff do recommend a conditional approval. I've put forward 14 conditions that are recommended to you. Primarily, these are satisfaction of the city's review staff's memos, the city engineer, fire chief, and landscape architect, and then a number of other, I would say more or less standard conditions for this type of development that include agreements, fees, permits, and additional reviews as needed. That brings me to my recommendation to you. That was in the report for this evening. Staff do recommend a denial of the preliminary plat and PUD plans as presented. I want to note that. One of the things that staff are looking for is potentially more information or maybe some more discussion on what the city's planning commission and council would like to see from a design standpoint, because it doesn't appear to squarely meet the design standards. Staff do support and recommend approval of the comprehensive plan amendment, again, as I mentioned, because that kind of cleans things up a little bit. The planning commission should hold a public hearing tonight, discuss the proposal and determine findings they would like to recommend to the city council, and then make that recommendation. Or as I mentioned, we can always table the request for more information. If a planning commission does move to table something, I always want to ask for, what are you looking for when it comes back to you? Is it more information, different design, like what would it be? So with that said, I have a couple of motions up on the screen that we can come back to for your discussion later. The developer does have a presentation that we've queued up for them they'd like to provide to you. So my recommendation for you, Chair and Commission, is to hear from the developer a bit about their development, and then hold that public hearing that's been posted for this item. And after the public hearing, we can always come back and answer more questions. So I'm happy to take questions if you have any for me right now.
Questions for staff? What's our history with the public roads within this type of development within the city?
That's a good question. There are a couple of developments that do have private roads in Lake Elmo. Typically, staff push development towards public roads because we have clear standards for public roads. And I think the most important thing is the city's team knows what fits in the public roads. What you have here is pretty similar in the sense that you've got utilities, which would be public utilities, water and sewer, running under the road. And so we know how much space we need when we build a public road to fit all of that in it, and potentially include things like boulevard plantings or dry utility corridors. That's your fiber, stuff like that. So the simple answer is we know really well what public roads do, and private roads typically are requested to help tighten things up, but at the same time, it makes it difficult to fit in all the public improvements.
Sure. So, but if it's a private road, the utility, the water, the sewer lines are underneath them are not, or it's a private road, then those underground utilities aren't private as well.
Correct.
So
they're
it's
public.
not like they're hooking up at Fifth Street and the rest is
Right.
on the
So
development.
you've
It
got a
still
public-
belongs to it's still a city asset.
Correct. There are public utilities that would run under the road. And so there's an easement over the road to ensure the city has the ability to get in there and
Yeah.
fix the utilities if and when that's needed.
Okay.
I've got a question, and it's regarding the irrigation. I know the city's really worked hard to get the reuse of the surface water to be used for that type of thing, but yet it said that they aren't going to utilize a stormwater reuse plan. Is there some reason for that?
Well, I think the simple answer in this case is the Inwood development from a stormwater perspective was planned in 2014
Yeah.
when they initially built the site. The stormwater ponding that will serve this part of the development, and the developer and their team can also speak to this, I'm sure, but the stormwater pond that will serve this part of the development is already constructed. It's south and west of this area. So I can pull up an aerial here. If you can see on the scoops, see on the screen, there's an existing pond just south and west of the apartment building site.
Question for you, Nathan, about the impervious cover.
Yeah.
Requirements are 75%, and on the table, it's that we're estimated at 80 to 83%. Was that estimate by the developer, or was that by you, or?
I scaled the drawings and
Okay.
just looked at it and did my best to estimate what I thought the coverage was gonna be, anticipating that we needed an impervious surface. And I was looking at the specific lots. So if I'll go back,
Yeah. 'Cause I know that impervious surface is something that we don't often like to move on, move away from. So I would assume that would be one of the things that the developer would have provided with this, but
yeah,
one of my
one thing
questions.
to consider is with this form of development, it might be something that could be seen as acceptable if you have the open spaces around the townhome lots. So
Sure.
if we're looking at the impervious surface limit on the individual lots, we're looking at the small box around each building.
Right.
Where it's really hard to have less than, what they're proposing. So that's acknowledged, but it's still a flexibility that's needed.
I think in the developer's packet, that was part of the staff report, they're showing that it's at 65%.
Yeah, that's a good point. One of the things that I'm looking at is with these individual units on the individual lots. I think the developer's packet's looking at the whole project area, and that's fair. But we need to understand how much impervious is on each of these individual owner-occupied lots. Let's say some of the owners come in the future and request to build a larger patio. Then we've got technically more impervious surface that we
Right.
hadn't planned for and have no way to review.
And then just another clarifying question for the setbacks. They're pretty low. Is that the setbacks from Fifth Street, or is that the setbacks to the private roads as well?
That's a good question. So the front and rear yard setbacks for the townhome lots that we're referring to, those are actually, again, based on these lot lines that are on these small lots that are drawn around each individual unit. So it's 5 and 9 feet on the front yards, and you can see, there's a lot more space than 5 or 9 feet from the house or the structure to the road. And again, we're looking at the individual lots, because that's how we always review for things like setbacks and impervious.
Okay. So each cluster of townhomes
Right.
you're viewing as as a lot,
Right.
basically. Okay.
More broadly speaking, if you look at the things like the distance of the building between the building and the road or building to building, those are more appropriate. On the surface, I should just clarify, I don't think staff necessarily have concerns with those.
Staff does not have concerns with the setbacks?
Not necessarily with the lot setbacks that you've just asked about.
Okay. Any other questions for Nathan?
Guys? Any?
Not yet.
All right, let's hear from the developer. Thank you, Nathan.
Yep.
Yeah, nicely done. Thank you, Nathan.
All right, just to advance.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. My name is John Raskin. I'm with MI Homes. And just a quick background, MI Homes entered this market about 10 years ago by purchasing Hans Hagen Homes. And we've been in business about 60 years here in this market. And I was the one that brought forward. Sure. Okay. I will try to speak up. So again, John Rask with MI Homes, and I just had mentioned, just for the benefit of the audience, that, you know, it was formerly with Hans Hagen Homes. I was president of Hans Hagen Homes when we sold to MI. I've been the person that's been involved, probably the only one in this room, frankly, who's been involved in every step of this project since it was first came forward in 2013. And I do think it's important here. It's a little bit more than semantics, but this project and the property that we're here to review tonight is part of the Inwood PUD and was rezoned PUD. Now, the only thing that we didn't do in 2015, or that the council at the time didn't approve, was the specific site design. But the land uses and the PUD benefits were all established in 2015 with that original plan. And I'm gonna go through some of that. I think it will make a little bit more sense. And again, I think it's a little bit more than semantics, because I think what we've brought forward tonight is consistent. And I don't see this as a new PUD. This is certainly part of the Inwood PUD. And there were a lot of decisions made by the city council and the planning commission, the park commission, in 2014 and 15 that apply to this specific site as part of the Inwood PUD. So I will go through those, but when we, just by way of history, when we first looked at this site, it's 160 acres roughly, and we master planned it. It was MI Homes and the Schreier family, Dick Schreier at the time, that looked at this entire site and really came to the city and say, you know, you've got commercial up at the corner of Inwood and 10th, and you've got high density to the south, single family. Like, how do we better integrate all of these things to deal with transportation, stormwater, streets, trails, parks? And so we really engaged in like I said, a 2-year process to study this thing in great detail. And it's a little, to be honest, disappointing to sit here tonight and hear, like, pretend like this stuff never happened in essence, and that we're not recognizing the many PUD benefits that were provided as part of this 160-acre development. And I'll go through those. And I understand there's been a change in planning commission. There's been a change in staff. I think we've worked with numerous community development directors over the last 10 years to advance this project. And, you know, I understand at times we have to take a step back and take a look at what was actually approved. But when you look at kind of two-dimensionally on this site plan, you know, there were a lot of considerations given to how do you arrange the land uses. And part of the PUD benefit was this is a mixed-use project. The city had identified in its comp plan that you wanted multifamily, you wanted commercial, and you wanted single family. So how do we best do that on this site? And again, we spent time running through that. And one of the major factors at the time, as you can imagine, is you had the Stonegate neighborhood to the east, and those are large lot residential properties. And as you can imagine, they were not thrilled about, you know, a more urban development next to them, even though it was consistent with the city's comp plan. So one of the considerations as part of the PUD is we dedicated a linear park. There were a row of trees that Mr. Schreier had planted for Christmas trees to be harvested, but nonetheless, we left them there and built a trail through there. And we actually supplemented that buffer by adding trees. We relocated trees within the buffer to protect the folks in Stonegate so they wouldn't see it and could have their privacy still. And that was a consideration. And we put the multifamily south of Fifth Street, again, away from the existing residents. And it was recognized that, you know, we'd have this progression of land use intensity where we went from commercial to the south to the multifamily to the single family, and then consistent with the comp plan had some commercial to the west side of the project. The other portion, like I said, was Eagle Point and how we dealt with that and the road connection that we provided. A big consideration, though, when we came in on this was Fifth Street, because Fifth Street didn't exist through this portion of the city. And we worked with the city engineer and the landscape architect to come up with a parkway design that would be implemented through this project. And that section of road alone was nearly $3 million that both Hans Hagen Homes and the Schreiers had participated in. Well, we fully funded it. We've participated in funding the signal at Inwood and Fifth Street. We built turn lanes on Inwood, we built turn lanes on 10th Street. And all of these were recognizing the land use intensity that was gonna occur on this site. And when you look at the PUD, it anticipated 72,000 square feet of commercial that's yet to come. So all of the transportation improvements we built not only served the single family, but the multifamily and the commercial. In terms of stormwater, at the time, there was a lot of flooding taking place south of this site, mainly kind of coming through Lake Elmo into Woodbury. Wilmes Lake, I think is how you pronounce that in Woodbury, was flooding. So we worked with the South Washington Watershed District, along with the city of Lake Elmo, was to come up with a comprehensive stormwater plan for this site. And I think one of the truly unique aspects of this project as it was developed is that every one of those islands within the single family is an infiltration basin. If you've ever driven this neighborhood, and I'm biased, but I think it turned out very well. It looks beautiful today. But those are infiltration basins designed to slow the rate and volume of runoff coming off of this site. And then we built it, and those feed into a pond. And maybe to answer, this large pond on the site there is actually, does have stormwater reuse. When we put it in initially, the city had objected to stormwater reuse in 2014 and 15. I know the neighborhood ultimately got the city, I believe, to allow the use of that. So I think the evolution or the thinking by the city has changed on that, but there's the ability, the irrigation system and the pumps are there to reuse that. But all of that was done, as well as the ponds in the southwest corner of the site. Those ponds were developed to serve the multifamily site, the commercial. There's large infiltration basins there. So quite a bit of thought went into, and even though we didn't have a specific layout for the multifamily at the time, the city asked us to provide the concept, which you see here today, so that we could understand how all of these things function together. And again, I think Nathan correctly points out that it wasn't specific criteria developed at that time, but the general land use and the density and the units were all accounted for in the EAW, in the traffic studies, in the stormwater plans. The impervious surface, which I'll share in more detail here in a minute, were all part of this master plan, as well as the traffic and open space. Oops. So when you look at the open space plan, and Nathan showed a portion of this, but again, there was a fair amount dedicated, not only in terms of some private open space, but public, the park that I believe is now, it was an extension of the Stonegate Park. I think it's Ivywood Park, maybe, is what it was ultimately named. And then the trail corridor going north and south, that was dedicated as public park. We had offered up some additional parks south of Fifth Street that the City Park Commission did not want it at the time. But the amount of credits given on the parkland to the north also apply to the multifamily. So I know the city doesn't want additional land, but there are park credits that are provided for in the developers agreement between the city and MI Homes for that transfer to apply to this multifamily, which is clearly stated. And really at the time, it was, there was more of the city didn't want a large park, so we gave a little pocket park that connected to the Stonegate Park. More of the focus was on the trail corridors through the city, which I'll show you here in a minute, or through the neighborhood. And then really how do you kind of incorporate some of the open space and the ponds. And we really focused on getting rid of a lot of little ponds throughout the neighborhood, as you often see, and create a bigger pond that could be an amenity for the future commercial, the neighborhood. It could be pond irrigation, and the whole site was kind of created around that concept. There's just, I know, comments, and we'll talk about there, site just on the amount of open space. This calculates the acreage within this portion of the site. Again, when the city looked at this, the stormwater plan for the entire neighborhood, all of the factors that went into it at the time, including the multifamily, we had about a 37% impervious surface calculation. So I don't think it's appropriate to just look at impervious or open space on just the multifamily portion, because this was master planned and a PUD was approved for the entire site with the common open spaces provided. And as part of this plan, the city asked us to put together a sidewalk and trail plan, and this is part of the approved PUD for the entire site. The orange, if you will, is the trail connections through the neighborhood, and the red is the sidewalks. And again, a lot of focus was put on by the Park Commission and the Planning Commission and the council on what does this trail look like as it relates to Fifth Street and connections through the neighborhood and future connections on 10th and Inwood. And at the time, again, we were looking at how do we do something a little less intense in terms of impervious surface? How do we do a lower impact development as it relates to stormwater? And we did not put sidewalks on every street in this neighborhood, and that was, again, something discussed through numerous meetings and discussions with staff. And a lot of the single-family portion of the neighborhoods don't have sidewalks because they're small loop streets designed to calm traffic, allow people to walk, reduce the amount of impervious and the amount of concrete that's in the neighborhood. And the same thing was true when we looked at the multifamily, again, trying not to pave it, the entire site, but leave more green space, provide the trail connections and the pedestrian connections within the neighborhood to feed the commercial, to feed, the trail connections and allow people to walk and have a walkable community, but also balancing that with trying to put too much impervious and pavement everywhere. So whether I guess you agree or not, this was what the city council approved for the neighborhood and the rules we've been playing by since 2015, which now I understand, in staff's comment and review, they're trying to apply ordinances that maybe were just adopted in the last year or so to something that's already been approved, to something that has a lot of infrastructure already installed on. And in addition, to the physical layout and the land uses of the site, we did do a lot of enhanced landscaping throughout the project. If you've driven it, you'll notice along Fifth Street that at our own doing, we provided an enhanced entrance and berming and trees. And part of that was obviously to buffer the single family from Fifth Street, but provide that appropriate transition from the single family homes to the multifamily. And that was provided all the way along Fifth Street. When you look at some of and these aren't great pictures, I'm sorry, I took them off Google Maps, but the one on the north is the park that's there today that was dedicated by us for the entire neighborhood. The lower right corner is the trail corridor that goes along the neighborhood to the east there through the existing trees. And then the picture in the lower left corner is the one that it illustrates what we did within the neighborhood to provide trail connections, not your typical trail connections in the front yard, but through a green corridor that where a trail meanders and has some landscape features and benches, and all of those were part, again, of this comprehensive plan. We did do a very detailed traffic study for the entire neighborhood that looked at all of the adjoining roadways, that looked at the improvements that I talked about to 10th Street and Inwood and the signal and the Fifth Street connection and Eagle Point. In one area of note was, as we looked at all of the transportation needs of the neighborhood and in the study that was provided and reviewed by the city and MnDOT and the county, Inwood, or the Island Trail, was installed. And it was installed to serve this neighborhood, obviously, otherwise why build it? And turn lanes were not required by the traffic study. Now, the traffic study did provide turn lanes along Fifth Street and, like I said, 10th Street and Inwood, but there were no turn lanes anywhere on the Island Trail from Eagle Point up to 10th. So when you go through the existing neighborhood, there are no turn lanes provided, and none were, I don't know if you need to see it, but none were required by the transportation study, and it's not intended to be a high-speed roadway. It's intended to be a neighborhood collector, and neighborhood collectors typically would not have a turn lane. The wider the road, the faster people go, and we were trying, again, to calm traffic and provide more green space. we started just shifting gears to the current site plan now. You know, we went to the city staff, I think it was back in July of last year. And by August, we submitted a formal plan to them and a formal concept plan review application that was reviewed by the city over about a 60-day period. And they came back to this original plan and said, hey, we don't like cul-de-sacs and, you know, we don't like the private roads. I would say that your ordinance allows private streets. That's not something unique we're asking for. It's provided for in the code as a conditional use permit, and it is something that's common in a project like this. But we listened to staff's concerns, and we came back after the August submittal and submitted a concept plan in response that got rid of the cul-de-sac and made some other changes. We still were requesting private streets. As the engineer and Nathan and the city planner had commented that, you know, they are allowed, but we'll have to work through the details, which we thought we had until we got the staff report. And then we came back with a final concept that, again, got rid of the cul-de-sac on the west side of the road there. We got rid of the drive and combined it with the single family. We fronted the townhomes on the public street. But as you get to the current plan here before you, I think what's probably a challenge is trying to apply public street standards to basically a driveway or an alley, however you want to describe it. And I think what's important from the time we started this project till today is how do you address Fifth Street? I mean, Fifth Street's the public thoroughfare that when people drive, that's the image they get of Inwood. That's the image they get of what's to the north and the landscaping we did, and it's gonna be the image they get here. And as people get into the neighborhood, of course we need it to look good. We're selling these units, and we've done numerous projects like this throughout the metro. Never one, I would say, with private streets, public streets. Every one of them have private streets. Every city we've ever built townhomes in allow private streets, and you know, I'm not aware of any that don't. It's a pretty common approach in a project like this. And you know, the issue is if you're going to the front doors and create a streetscape that's more pedestrian friendly, that, you know, hides the garages and the parking areas, at some point you need an alley. And then at some point behind that, you have to have, as in the south part of the site, homes that can be accessed from the front. So we put those in the back. I'll show you some examples of where we've done this in other places, pictures, but you can't meet every one of these city public street requirements in front because what's being asked of us is that we front on a public street and then we build a public street behind us so that we have basically double fronted lots everywhere. People don't like to live like that. And it's not necessary. It just adds a lot of street to an area that's really designed to be a private driveway. So this is an example of a project we did in Minnetrista. It's similar unit styles. The nice thing about this is when you front the units on the street and you put the driveways and the garages and the utilities in back, you've got plenty of room to landscape. So I know there's concerns about how do you landscape in the back, but I think what's more important is how do we landscape along Fifth Street? How do we create the true public elements of this neighborhood in a way where you can create something that looks good and you can landscape it and you put the utilities in the back. It's traditional kind of design approaches, and we've got a lot of experience doing it. This is a project down the street, not ours, but on Fifth Street. And this is what we tried to design around, because this is I don't know the name of the project, but it's just to the east of ours where they back the townhomes up to Fifth Street. And I think, you know, they're nice looking units and they're not casting judgment on it. They're people's homes and I'm sure they're proud of them, but we wanted to do something different where the front doors were facing the street, and I think that looks better. This is another project in Lake Elmo, just down the street from the last one, where they, instead of putting the back, they put the sides. But again, I don't think it has that same feel for what we're trying to accomplish in Inwood. And, you know, if we were doing this, you know, perhaps we wouldn't need as much flexibility, but trying to come up with something like this does require some of the flexibility we're requesting. When you look at, and this is a lot tighter than what we've agreed to here in Lake Elmo, because these driveways are about 24 feet, the road is probably 22, and in here we have 30-foot setbacks and a wider road, but, well, I think the road's 24 as well, but the city staff wanted greater separation, but this is an image that depicts the rear of the townhomes facing the front of another, and, you know, we don't typically put sidewalks in the drive or the alleyway. The sidewalks are on the other side of the unit where the front door connects, and then the units on the left side of this image, they don't have a sidewalk in front, but I know there's concern from staff about being able to plant these areas, and, you know, we plant them in every one of our communities. This is in West St. Paul's, a redevelopment deal. You can see all the flags and the utilities, and you can still find room in there to plant. We do it consistently, and, you know, it looks nice, and it softens the view of that private drive. This is another example, again, of a front-load townhome project. This one's in Blaine, the Groveland Village. This one is out in Corcoran. This would be representative of the units that are gonna go along the Bremer Bank property. So again, where you can't, because to build another street or flip these units as suggested, now you got units facing out towards Bremer Bank parking lot. Again, I know staff has concerns about how do you plant trees? Well, there is room within these areas. You can see the electrical transformer box there in the middle foreground. The others, you got sewer and water coming in there. You have to locate it. You plant them. And again, these are for sale townhomes. So these are owners. They take pride in their homes. It's an attached home, but a lot of homeowners will plant additional plantings. They'll have flower pots and other things that they put into the neighborhood. So it's not the sterile environment, and homeowners are free. And, you know, we'd like to do more landscaping in the area. It's just trying to work through the details with city staff on that. So the one comment I would make too, because I know there was, if you look at, we did originally show, because the comment was made to us that we wanted that, you know, the city wanted each unit to have a sidewalk or a trail. So we did put a trail along the Bremer Bank property line there in the open space, if you will. And if it's the desire of the commission, we would gladly move that to the front yard and put it along the road. We're open to either one of those. So I think that right there is an easy fix. But those units, again, are the ones I just showed you. We can't flip those and have the front doors facing the commercial area. So as I mentioned, the trick to having the front doors on Fifth Street is ultimately you gotta flip that and have units facing the other direction. So I think with that, I know that was long, but I appreciate you taking the time to listen, because there's 14 years of history on this project and an awful lot of money and time invested in it by us and the Schreier family, and it's important that we're able to advance this project as originally contemplated, and I think we've done a really good job of trying to fit the original PUD and what was approved to your new standards. And, you know, this is somewhat of a hardship situation like you would look at in a variance, where, you know, we didn't create the hardship because the standards that we designed to in 2015 didn't exist. And now you've got new standards, more recent, and we're trying to balance the two. And I guess we just ask for, you know, your consideration on this as you look at it, to say, you know, you got new standards, you got an approved PUD, how do we marry the two? And I think we've done a really good job of that. But if there are things that you think can be improved on, we're certainly open to discussing that. And if we have to discuss it with staff some more, we're happy to do that. I would say we've been at this for 8 months. I was surprised by the recommendations in the staff report. Some of those we'd never heard. I'd never heard of a recommendation of denial until 20 minutes ago. That was not in the report. That was not shared with us. So we weren't in a position to respond to that. But again, I think given everything here, there's certainly reasons that I hope you can find to support it, because we've done, I think, everything we set out to do when we started this neighborhood, and we certainly would appreciate a vote of approval on this tonight. So be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions from the commission?
So you've obviously changed the plat from what you established in 2013, 2014 to what you have now.
Correct.
Have you increased the density as well?
I think the density overall for the project is, if it's not the same, it's within a few units anyways. I don't.
I think I saw it was 8. It was 8.
It's actually a little less overall on the project, because I think there was some final adjustments on the single family, but total number of
So the
units,
previous one had more density.
slightly.
Okay. So why not stick with the original plat?
I think what was recognized is that that was a concept, just what we thought at the time. There's nothing about that plat either that conforms. It wasn't, the plat itself wasn't approved. The PUD, the general zoning, the land use was approved. But as Nathan correctly points out, there was no specific plat approval because it was a concept, but
Which
a
is
concept that was.
why we're trying to
Yeah,
approve the plat now.
correct. And
Okay.
I think what we're doing today brings us a whole lot closer to the city's current design standards in terms of how do you address the public streets and some of the pedestrian connections and the layout. So I think it makes sense
I
to,
certainly appreciate all the work that you put
Yeah.
into it, so you've
Yeah, well,
you've
thank
obviously
you.
made some efforts, so thank you.
All right.
All right.
With that, we can, any other comments from the commission? Can we open the public hearing?
Please. I move to open the public hearing.
Second?
All approved?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. It is 7:38, and with that, we'll open the public hearing. I've got two people scheduled to speak. I know we had one comment that got emailed in that the commission all saw. Other than that, I've got two people. We'll call you up. I ask you that you give your name and your address, and you'll have 6 minutes to comment. It's not a question and answer period for us. We're just listening. And when you get to, if you're about a minute left, I'll give you a little signal here to let you know that time is short. With that, we'll start with Lisa McGinn.
Lisa McGinn, 8756 Upper 7th Place North in the Inwood community. First this evening, I would like to address the prior development. They only came through with the apartment building there on the corner of 5th. And in looking at that, we noticed that a very high building with no setback or very minimal setback would cause a tunneling effect on 5th Street. And that's kind of how our setbacks changed through council over the last 4 or 5 years, is the recognition that if you put a building right on top of a sidewalk there, it causes a tunneling effect within that neighborhood, which certainly isn't consistent with private homes right there and the traffic that goes through that area. Mr. Rask talked about history. I'd like to give you 10 years of history of living in Inwood on Island. I live right on the corner there. While they did a traffic study to begin with, history has shown us that Island has now become a thoroughfare, especially with traffic on Inwood and 10th. The speed in which they drive through our neighborhood now is in excess of 30 to 40 miles an hour. And that can be seen on a daily basis by any of the residents within our community, who, by the way, are mostly 50 and above. Also, the traffic on 5th Street has become basically a freeway. You rarely get anything less than 40 to 50 miles an hour on 5th Street in that area. I have concerns over the townhouses being built close to that blind curve. There is if you've driven 5th Street there's a blind curve that comes around the east side of that project. So what I am asking the city or the developer, or maybe a partnership between the two, is to find a way to get pedestrians across Fifth Street, because we will get somebody killed there. They have very little open space on the south side of Fifth Street. We have two very nice parks that now have almost become one, and they're going to be using those parks, which is what they're there for. In the past, we've talked about Stonegate not being used. It is used now on a weekly basis. They were just playing soccer over there, they were playing lacrosse over there this week, but it's dangerous to get across Fifth Street. So whether that is re-looking at the traffic that is in that neighborhood, whether it's participating in this crosswalk study that the city is currently doing, we need a crosswalk at Ivywood or at least at Island Drive. It's a dangerous condition, and I can tell you from law enforcement experience, we're gonna have an accident, and it's gonna be somebody's kid trying to cross that to get to that park. Third for me would be the recognition by the Planning Commission and Council that Stonegate Park remains a park and is taken off the list for the filtration plant that they've talked about. I know that council has said that's their priority, that we want it to remain a park, but they will not give us a guarantee that that park will remain there. They said, well, it might be a last-ditch effort at the filtration plant. Our concern is that is the only, Ivywood and Stonegate are the only parks available to a large area of residential and now multifamily use from Keats, from 10th to Hudson. That's the only parks available for the residents that live in that area. We all knew that we were going to have multifamily and townhouses to the south of us. And I trust M&I Homes, they build our homes, and I trust that they will build a good product. But with the concerns that we have, I'd like to see the funds that are taken in lieu of a park, if those funds somehow could be dedicated to Stonegate and Ivywood to enhance that area. Our association within Inwood already has taken on the responsibility for plowing all the trails that surround our neighborhood. And we pay every month to have those trails plowed throughout the winter. And we take pride in that area and allowing not just our neighborhood, but Stonegate and the rest of the neighborhoods to the east of us now can walk through our neighborhood through the winter, because we have chosen to do that. We've also, for Ms. Dunn, the other thing that we've done is our association has taken on the responsibility of taking care of the water reuse, and we use that for all of our common areas within both our basement homes and our slab homes. And to our benefit, we have saved several $1,000s a year in irrigation cost. But it doesn't come free. We've had people out there for the last week working on those pipes and whatever else has to be taken care of. But we've chosen to pay for that every month to make sure that those water reuse is working. And so for that, I think that that is a good thing for the people living south of us. In closing, there is very little parking. In fact, there's no parking for Ivywood Park. They have to park, just parallel park on the side. It has already become an issue because of the pickleball courts, which are great. Everybody loves them except the neighbors right north of them. But if we're going to take on this much multi-family homes, we're going to have to look at some type of parking for Ivywood and Stonegate there.
30 seconds.
So
Thanks, Lisa.
I guess that's all I have to say this evening. I hope that you consider what we've said tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Matt Anzelek. I said that right?
Council members, appreciate your time. Matt Anzels, 8757 Lower 8th Place. I'd like to reiterate what Lisa had to say. I live on the corner there of Island Trail, and I can see this being a very, very busy street with this development. And I think Mr. Rask alluded to the fact that initially it was going to be pretty much of a little streetway there for the development. But now for the access to get up to 10th Street, I could see a lot of the people in the new development proposal using Island Trail to get up there. They're not gonna go towards the Quick Trip and deal with a stoplight there and then another stoplight up on 10th. They're gonna shoot right up Island Trail and cut right across and go wherever they wanna go from there. And then I'd like the council to also consider the water source, good, clean, well water. Is there gonna be enough of that? With the school going in to the east, a few miles down 10th Street, and with this new development, how is that going to affect good, clean water? So I thank you for your time.
Thank you. Any other comments? Anyone else would like to speak? No? With that, it's,
I've got one question.
oh, go ahead.
Did you say that something came in for an email? Could that be read into the record?
What, do you have a copy of it, Sophia, for a,
I got it right here.
all right?
It was an email, I don't know that there's an address, from a resident at 8725 Upper 7th Place, and they were not in support of the PUD final plat, or just generally not in support.
Chair, members of the commission, I just add that public comment that the city's received is available on the city's website for public review.
All right. If there are no other, you need you to
Come to the
please
podium.
approach the podium, name and address, please.
My name is Ron Kelpinski. I live at 8817 Upper 7th Place. So I'm on the other side of Fifth. My question, it's not clear to me, based on all the different slides and so forth, are the units facing Fifth, facing to the north, are they two-story or three-story?
Buried.
Is that,
Chair, members of the commission, if you'd like me to answer that question.
Please do,
The
Nathan.
answer is 3 stories.
okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Motion to close the public hearing.
So moved.
Motion by Commissioner Vreese, second by Commissioner Char, and it is 7:49. We will close the public hearing.
You gotta call the question.
Oh, I'm sorry, you're right. Thank you. I keep on forgetting to do that.
Ah, no.
All right, I appreciate, you should be doing this. And we need all in favor to close the public hearing?
Aye.
All right. Public hearing's closed at 7:49. And we need, any questions for Nathan, or we need to have a motion
Do we need to have a motion or discuss? Is that,
to discuss?
do
Yeah.
we need to do that? Yes, okay.
Y'all might want to stay.
Yeah.
All right, so we've got 2 things to consider here. There's basically the preliminary plat, PUD, and then later on is the comprehensive plan amendment. So first off, I move to recommend the city council deny the preliminary plat and PUD for the Inwood townhome development requested by MI Homes with the findings in fact proposed by staff and the commission.
I second that.
Things have changed. So, I mean, it's, yes, as a whole, the whole development was proposed and approved back in 2013, 2014. City staff and council have made a lot of moves since then to improve our standards. And I think that the new portion of this development needs to abide by those standards. And I think what we've been presented with is too far away from where it needs to be. For me, a lot of the setbacks and I think there needs to be a new traffic study as well, because traffic has changed a lot in the last 10 years. There's a lot more dense in the area. So for that reason, I am not in favor of the preliminary plat and PUD.
Commissioner Dunn?
Yep. I've had quite a few questions, and I'm glad that the traffic study was brought up. I went down and saw the area in person and walked it, and I was involved in the Parks Commission many, many years ago, and I saw the the park on the corner, and all I could think of was if you had another 500 or so residents to what already is there, it's just overwhelming. So I didn't think that that was appropriate. And then I went up to Stonegate Park and looked down over the hill, and that's where they were talking about taking out the trees, I guess. So I just looked at it, and it's so intense, and everything is so close. I mean, 5 foot is not very far. And I think that we can do better and have a better development on that site. Health, safety, and welfare has always been important to me, and the water issue will continue no matter what for me.
I understand that it was brought up in the 2014, 2015, and yes, there was some preliminary work done, but it wasn't specific. And when I'm looking at this specific, it just seems like there's so much squished in there. And I know there's an additional 8 units, and there was one little, I'm not a developer, so I'm not gonna say it, but one little, 12-unit piece in there that's kind of cockeyed in there. And I just feel like some of this could be kind of shifted to give us the setback. And the impervious surface, you're right there on the edge, and I cannot believe that some homeowner is not gonna come in and wanna put in an additional patio or something like that, that takes away even more impervious surfaces. And then you've got the water issue. There's a lot of things that I think come into play with this that I'm not quite, it's not quite there for me.
Question, was the density's decreased overall from the initial
Yeah,
proposal?
so, yeah, the
And
question.
Is that a result of the apartment building, or is that a result of, do we know that? So
So-
did we lose a floor in the initial plan for the apartment building, so therefore the density's gone down?
Okay, yeah, so Chair Raycamp, if the question is, in 2014, we had a number of units, and now we have fewer,
Right.
why? The answer is that there are fewer proposed, and it's fewer townhomes, but mostly it's fewer units in the apartment building.
Okay. So if there was a shift, it was.
It was
more-
down.
More townhomes, less apartments.
So in the EAW, which is what we had to look at in order to understand like what was contemplated when this first came in 2014.
Yep.
Staff looked at the number of units that were anticipated in that review, and there were 150 attached townhomes, and now proposed there are 149, so there's one fewer than there were previously.
Okay.
And then with the apartment building, there was another 150, 140 units that were anticipated by the AW, and now you have 123. So you have fewer units proposed for the apartment building than were initially,
And one less townhome.
and one less townhome.
Okay. So
I
we're
stand corrected then.
the other way.
Okay.
I guess that's a little bit of my challenge here is to understand what was agreed to and what was passed in 2014 with the Plat and the PUD, and where the conflict lie and the current proposal, and why the developer's having to come back.
Yeah, if I could just provide a little bit of clarification on this point. The city did review and approve a planned unit development that had a certain number of units in it. It also has a density that's in its comprehensive plan that would generally support about this level of development. So I think that, with that all in mind, the form of development here is appropriate in terms of the types of units that are proposed. And the location of where they've put the apartment building and the townhomes is also appropriate. It meets not only the city's 2040 plan, actually the 2030 plan before that had similar future land use guidance in this area. So this development has been, a known commodity for a decade or longer. And so, the actual form of development in terms of units is supportable, but from staff's perspective, but the design is where we, get into those details.
Okay.
And so that informs staff's review.
Okay, so I was incorrect on mine. Sorry. But I do like the additional trees, landscaping, the city wanting where the parking goes, things like that. I still think there's some tweaking to be done.
I guess overall, I like the idea. I like the idea of the additional housing, and I'd like to see you go back to the senior housing units in there. I didn't see anything referenced in this current presentation, and it looks like it was a part of the prior development for maybe the apartment building. I'm looking at the way these are laid out in there, and they are really tight. It reminds me of Bailey's Arbor, how you have the streets behind with the garages and everybody's backing up into everybody's driveway to get in and out of there.
Microphone.
And then on the other side, you have the sidewalk that goes through there, but it's really hard to identify where you're supposed to park and where people live because the addresses are, to access the units, you have to walk down a sidewalk to get to their house versus just parking in a guest parking in the back area there. I would like to see more trees somehow implemented in here, and can we do something other than vinyl? There are so many options for siding. I've seen beautiful siding materials they seem cost-effective and maybe hail resistant, something that'll hold up better in the storms. The vinyl has to go away. That's one of my biggest problems with this whole development, so those are my comments.
So question, when was the last traffic study completed?
Commissioner, the last traffic study would have been reviewed with the EAW. That would have been in 2014.
2014, okay. So I echo some of the concerns here. One certainly, as I just mentioned, the questions is traffic, and I think that's something that does bring some concern in terms of, I don't know the solution to that, but certainly it's the proximity to that street, 10th Street, I should say. And second, just to echo, I think the trees and making sure that we hold fast on what we feel we need for community to maintain the things we're trying to, for the look and feel of our community. So that and the setback, I think that's been discussed.
I'll just say one more comment. Visually, if you could come up with something different, that apartment building is not visually appealing, and if you're gonna have to look out on it from across the street in single-family homes, it just, I don't even know what it looks like, but it's not visually appealing, so maybe a different,
Does it meet our design standards?
it probably does, but it's ugly, so not something I'd want to look at every day.
So if we are going to have, the motion is denial, we have to provide fact and findings. Correct? So from what I'm hearing is,
It does not, if I'm not mistaken, it does not meet what the city is requesting for trees and landscaping, for the parking, for the pedestrian connectivity, and possibly impervious surface. Nathan, you can correct me on that one, and setbacks.
The setbacks, yeah,
And we still have the concern about water
and safety,
and traffic.
traffic safety.
any other comments?
On a positive note, I do like your subdivision. I do like the work that has been done.
Absolutely.
And I do like what this company has to offer, and the trails and the green space and the homes, the single-family homes. I'm not saying that I don't want anything having to do with this company or them coming in. I think what they have done is beautiful. I would just like this to meet with, I'm a community member here in Lake Elmo. I want to maintain what we expect here.
I think my concerns are the developer has rights, and developer, I think, was led down a path, felt he was following through and has been very adaptable in the last 4 months and trying to meet these solutions. And the density's there, the plan is pretty good. I don't know how much more flexibility they have with a small space to get the density, to fit these units in there, to make it a viable project. And it's been a known since 2014 that it was made, that this is what was basically going to come out here. So within that, I think the solutions aren't that far away to get there for you. So we're, 90%, but I think we know we're, once the vote goes, it's going to go to council, and council's going to make their decision on what they want to do. But I appreciate, obviously, the effort that the developers put into this. I think the community engagement is key to come back and give you some more feedback of what tweaks need to be made, and with staff. We're close. Any other comments?
I agree with that.
No, I think that message is to be sent to, I think it's closer than maybe it sounded like when we're going
Right,
through all these
right,
lists of things.
right.
I think from my perspective, I think the delta between where we are, where we want to be and where we are is not significant.
We're not too
It might have sounded like it when
Right.
throwing all these concerns out, but I agree.
Okay. And with that, take a vote on the motion. Move to recommend city council deny the preliminary plat and PUD for the Inwood townhome development requested by MI Homes with a. Mr. Chair? Yep. Can I comment? Sure.
Just quickly, I do appreciate the comments. Like I said, we've been at this for 8 months, trying to work through with staff. A lot of things that we never saw until the report came out. Some we heard about a week ago, some we heard about tonight. I do agree we're close on so many things. I did not know some of these were concerns. Had they been concerns, I think we would have addressed them before we appeared here tonight. I do think it's been a tremendous struggle to understand exactly what staff was looking for, because the standards are arbitrary when it comes to public streets. They're loud, and we've been trying to design them with the help of the city engineer, but they're trying to understand it as we go. And I understand they haven't done a lot of private streets in this community, so I think we can certainly work through that. Now, I would say, trying to incorporate. So when we designed this site, we understood, with working with the city, we could do private roads in here. So the location of Fifth Street really was placed understanding how we could get a reasonable use of this property with Fifth Street. And that wasn't public streets, and that wasn't the design standard. So had we known all of this today, maybe Fifth Street should have swung north, so we could have got additional roads in there to meet some of these, but those weren't the decisions made. So I would like, perhaps to have you consider tabling this so we could go back. But I will say, if that tabling means we have to do public streets, then we probably should just take it to city council with the recommendation of denial. If you think private streets can be incorporated and we can try to work towards some of these other concerns, then I think I would appreciate you tabling action on it tonight so we could go back to work with city staff and our engineers and figure out if we can't address some of these concerns. Thank you.
Well, now your Robert's rules have been called into order.
I know, and that's why I'm looking at staff. Do we need to rescind the motion?
Yes. If so, Chair, members of the commission, if you would like to move to table this item, you would have to rescind the motion, and then the person who made the motion would have to rescind it, and then you would have to make another motion, in this case, to table the item to a future
Sure.
meeting.
In the spirit of cooperation, I can rescind the motion to deny and instead move to table consideration of the Inwood Townhome development to a future meeting, which would be May 12th, to allow the applicant to revisit some of the things that were called into question here at this meeting.
Do we have a second?
I second.
And we need a vote?
Can I ask a quick question, though?
Absolutely.
May I ask a question of staff?
Yeah.
I have no knowledge on this. What is, I don't know if preferable is the right word, but which is the best working document, so to speak, to deny it, to table it? How works best to come to all of this?
Sure. So if the question is, how do we move forward in a way that we can all work together the
We're
best
working
way?
together, correct.
I think a motion to table, which has been requested by the developer, would be wise. It keeps us from having to make a final decision at the city council. We do have some time in the review process yet to come to a decision on the application, you should keep in mind that the city only has 120 days by statute before it has to provide a decision, unless the developer wishes to grant the city more time. And in some cases, that can be a good thing because it allows us to work through details together. So I think tabling would be an appropriate motion.
Thank you. I wanted to hear it from your side as well. Thank you.
And with that, vote to move to table consideration of Inwood townhome development to a future meeting. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion is to table. Thank you.
So, Chair and members of the commission, one point of clarification here. I believe we've tabled the entire application, so I just want to be clear that it's all things including the comprehensive plan amendment. So all three requests. Just want to be clear.
Yes.
Yep, okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
We'll move it all together as a package.
That makes sense.
Great. Next on the agenda would be new and unfinished business, which I don't believe we have any. And then after that is communication updates.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The City Council approved the Animal Inn conditional use permit and variance extension for two years. That was approved on April 1st, and your next meeting will be canceled, so we'll see you again on May 12th.
May 12th to discuss this project again. Fantastic.
Geez.
And with that, need a motion to adjourn the meeting.
I don't think you do.
I don't, you're right.
You can just do it.
And with that, it's 8:07, we'll adjourn the meeting for Monday, April 14th, the Planning Commission.